Welcome into Missing the Point. I am your host, Michael Marcangelo, joined alongside by Bob Kelly, Rayshon Buchanan, and today we have a very special guest. He has been a fixture in the Boston sports scene for 5 decades. His book, The Curse of the Bambino, details the heartache of the Boston Red Sox and their search for a World Series championship after selling Babe Ruth to the New York Yankees. He subsequently wrote Reversing the Curse after the Red Sox won in 2004. And in 2013, he and Cleveland Indians manager Terry Francona released Francona, a biography focusing on Francona's years as manager of the Red Sox. That book immediately became a bestseller. He was named the 2016 recipient of the J.G. Taylor Spink Award, presented annually by the Baseball Writers Association of America for meritorious contributions to baseball writing. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Dan Shaughnessy. Dan, thank you so much for joining us.
Nice to be here with you guys.
Yeah, we're really excited to have you, and we want to talk a little bit about the Red Sox and the Celtics. We have a couple of cool tidbits about the Celtics that I want to hear from you. But first things first, I think a lot of people on sports talk radio now, they kind of make it their job to be a contrarian. You were the original one in Boston. Yeah. So I'd love to learn or to hear about your story, especially when you're coming up, with Bob Ryan, who is a fan writer, right? He's a great writer, but he feels all the emotions, the highs and the lows. And you made it a point to kind of run this like a business. So I'd love to hear about how that went.
Yeah, I'm more detached than Bob. Bob's older than me, and I was reading him when I was in college and whatnot, and he's the greatest. And his knowledge is unsurpassed, and he's a beautiful writer. But yeah, he's a season ticket holder. He comes to it as a fan, more kind of rooting for the teams. He's been critical, but when I came into it, my directives were that you were objective, and I mean, none of us are really objective about sports. We all have opinions, so we bring those to it, and that's the fun of it. But I just feel like my job isn't to root for the team. If I were covering the presidential election, I'm not supposed to choose a candidate and do the analysis based on who I want to win, as much as give you the analysis of why it's going the way it's going. And that's what I try to do. Sometimes the better story is when the home team loses. And like right now, the Celtics are more interesting when they lose, because like this year is not going to end well. I mean, it's not like there's going to be some turnaround. They're going to get a 2 seed and get it back. This year's kind of just junk. So when they play these games last night, if I'm writing them, it's better when they lose, because you can slam them more and it's more fun and it's got more color and flavor. But so, yeah, I'm not a fan of the teams. I'm a fan of the sports. I like it when the local teams are in the playoffs. I got 12 parade covers here from page 1 when they win in this century. And it's always better when they win. People buy books and they have ideas. So that's good. But I don't, when things go bad, when Plaxico Burress catches that pass in the end zone, they don't go 19-0. I can't be all brokenhearted and crying at my keyboard, so I can't write the story. I got to write that story and tell people why they didn't go undefeated, what happened here. And same thing when Aaron Boone hits the home run off Wakefield, or the ground ball goes through Buckner's legs. Those stories are epic, and you have to be able to write them under deadline, in my case, and not be emotionally grieving. It's like if you bet on the game, you're all pissed off and you're mad at the umpires or the officials when you're writing it. You don't want to be that guy. You should be able to bring analysis to it without the emotion of having your heart broken. So that's the detachment that I bring to it that fewer and fewer people do now. And I understand that. It's evolution. It's far more fans covering the teams now, like fans of the teams that are in the room. And I push back on that. But again, that's just the way things have evolved.
Yeah, I just think about it because, you were the reason that my dad used to actually get the Sunday Globe. He always wanted to read you, and then always wanted to read Bob Ryan, because they weren't all that they were told like polar opposite views, right? But of the same thing. Oh. So you touched on the Celtics. I want to ask you a couple questions about that. We'll get started there. You wrote an article back in the fall saying the Celtics aren't as good as they think they are. How good do you think they are right now?
It's really messy right now. I mean, there's individual talent there, clearly. I mean, the ceiling's really high for Tatum. He's great talent. And Brown's better than I thought he would be. And so it's 2 tremendous talents. And Smart is a guy you always have to have on the floor. Any team would want him. You can see those things. I love Thompson when he was in Cleveland, inhaling rebounds, just great. We know what Kemba Walker was. There's a lot of individual talent there. They're not as talented as they were when Kyrie was there and Hayward, who was always hurt, and the two Jays were there. I mean, you think about that team now, they were really talented then. And they made the finals of the conference 3 times in 4 years. But right now, it's messy. You can tell they don't seem to like each other. They're not tough. They're so soft at the end of these games. You can go over those games, Dallas, Chicago, Atlanta, last night. You just know it's not going to go well. They can have a one-possession game and 3 minutes to go, and the other team just kicks the crap out of them. They get all the 50-50 balls and offensive rebounds. There's no way this is what Brad Stevens is telling them to do. So guys are just going off on their own. It's a mess.
Yeah, so that leads me right to my question is, in your opinion, whose fault is it then? Is it the players? It's from what you just said, you don't seem to think it's Brad, because obviously Brad's not telling him, listen, guys, go be soft and dog it the entire fourth quarter. Let's see some hero ball, Jason. Let's see that, So what do you think? Where does the blame fall when it comes to this team?
Oh, Danny's got to be accountable for the roster building of what this team looks like. And I think he probably botched the Hayward thing. He got greedy on that. I mean, I think Danny's a really great talent evaluator, and the drafting's been pretty good. And he has a great eye for talent. And so, but the way this thing has been assembled is not good. And there's not a lot of accountability there. Nobody blames Danny. Nobody blames Brad. And really, nobody blames the players either. Everybody's always just kind of fat and happy over there, starting with ownership. It's an unusual franchise in our town, because any other team was doing this, you'd have people with pitchforks storming the gates right now.
I'm sorry, Ray. One more question. My bad. So I have a question about that too. Is when it comes to Brad, and you say he's always happy, and this team doesn't hold people accountable. To me, that's the one thing that drives me insane. Is when you see them blow one of these leads, and Brad's up there still just chirping. Yeah. Played really hard tonight. We did this. Kemba's our guy. I love him. I love it when he says that. But it's like, when are we finally going to see that from Brad? Do you think that's ever coming? Is that the kind of coach he is, or is just what it is?
It's not him. That's why he's probably better off in college or high school, whatever. He's the boola guy. You're not going to get him turning over the food spread in the room and just kicking ass. That's just not him. So maybe he's too nice for this. It doesn't help that he's not an ex-player. He's not Pop. He's not a guy with all this gravitas to it. And it gets harder and harder to get guys to listen to you. So, but he knows this is a failed experiment right now.
Yeah, I mean, I sure hope he does. And obviously, back to your point about Danny, I hope Danny, feels the same way. And as far as his drafting goes, when it's a top pick, I feel like he does well, right? So obviously Marcus Smart at 6 in 2014, Jalen and Jays, they both were the number 3 pick in their respective drafts. But if he has to draft anything past 14, it's really been hit and miss from James Young, Gershon Yabusele was just awful. But it leads into the question I want to ask is, so, what do you think they can do in the short term to kind of change the course? Or do you think they should, just wait till the offseason to use the traded player exception and just try to fill holes in the team, there?
Well, Rayshawn, to your point, don't ever forget or forgive that they took Kelly Olynyk instead of Giannis.
Oh, right. Yeah, that too. Right. Exactly. That's another one. Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
I try
to forget that. Yeah. That's awful.
Giannis went like 15, so a lot of people passed on him, but still, it's one that we never let Danny forget because Kelly was 2 picks ahead of him. Right. I don't think they're going to use that trade exception. What they got tonight or tomorrow? I mean, I just think this is a lost year. I think they'll wait till the summer, let it shake out. I don't think you're going to see it now. I know there's talk about the kid in Orlando. There's talk about Collins. I don't see a move like that. I mean, I think a shakeup's in order. In the summer shakeup, it could be Jaylen Brown getting traded, something like that. I mean, to me, that's still on the table. I don't know the contractual situations, and it confuses me and all that. But I think since they're not going to change Danny or the ownership or the coach, you're going to have to shake up the roster. And what would do it more than a big move like that?
So, you've been covering the Celtics for a long time, right? Has there ever been a period since you've been in town where they've had this much talent and underperformed this significantly?
Well, I mean, this is a long time. The '83 team, they were swept by the Bucks in the playoffs, and they had 4 Hall of Famers. So they lost a 4-0 series, and they had Mikhail Parrish Bird. They had Tiny Archibald. There's 4 Hall of Famers there. They were swept 4 straight. That was pretty bad. But they won 57 games during the season, so they weren't chumps. And they won the championship the next year when they acquired Dennis Johnson. But that would be the closest to being a dysfunctional. It was the end of the term for Bill Fitch before they switched coaches, and some things had to happen. And there was some really dark days in the 70s when they had, McAdoo and Curtis Rowe and Sidney Wicks, and there was some dysfunction going on there. The end for Cowens, all that stuff. But this is this is a hard team to watch.
Yeah.
They are so soft at the end of these games.
It's painful
it just
sometimes,
makes you
man.
want to kill yourself.
Correct.
I'll never forget that Pelicans game is the one that stands out to me, because even up 21, I was watching it with my dad. Up 21, I looked right at him and went, they're going to lose this game. And he's like, what are you talking about? I'm like, are you watching? It's just, it's so obvious sometimes, and it's coming. I was telling these guys, I've made a good amount of fake money off this team this year because of how predictable they really are when it comes to when they lose and when they win. If this team is favored in a game against an underachieving team, I bet against them 100% of the time. And I win 100% of the time. They're just so predictable and soft. I couldn't agree more.
Before we kind of transition to baseball, because we want to really pick your brain here, I did stumble upon a pretty cool story, and I was wondering if you could give us a little insight into it, Dan. So 1985 Eastern Conference Finals, you notice that Larry Bird has taped 2 of his fingers together, and that I think you made the comment that it might be a little bit harder for him to shoot, or his shooting percentage would go down. And he challenged you to a free throw shooting contest with one of his hands wrapped. So I'd love just to hear a first person kind of how that went.
Well, it's now that I can sell a little product here. I just wrote a book. The book's called "Wish It Lasted Forever." It'll be out in November. So I had that team for 4 years every day, and in those days it was nobody's fault. But the way it was then, we lived with them. We traveled. We waited for bags, hotels, buses, practice, everything. It was like being on the team without the groupies or the fame or the money. But other than that, it was the same thing. So there we were, and you just got to know them, and we were able to tell the readers what they were like. And it's very rare time. So yeah, they called me Scoop. That was my nickname. Whenever I'd come into the locker room, Larry'd say, "Scoop, do you ever notice how quiet it gets when you walk in here?" And that was true, because nobody trusted me. It was, a very good system we had. So, yeah, he was taping it like this at practice. So there had been a barroom fight 2 nights earlier, and he might have had a broken bone. I don't know. But if you look up his playoff shooting, he shot 52% that year. It was his middle year of his 3 straight MVPs, height of his powers, the 60-point game, all that stuff, buzzer beaters left and right. And he got in a barroom fight, messed up his hand. He shot like 42% in the 9 playoff games after this happened. But he was taping it like this at practice. And I said, you can't play in the game like that, right? He said, "Scoop, I could tape my whole hand up, make more shots than you." And I'm like, that's probably true, but that's not what we're talking about here. And it was almost like a pool hustler thing. He kind of must have done it before. So they taped his hand like this. The thumb was taped. It was like he had a boxing glove on. And we did 100. He said, "We'll do 100 free throws, $5 a throw, 10 shots around." And says, "You want to go first or I'll go?" I said, "I'll go first." He said, "You don't like the pressure, do you?" I said, "That's right." So I went first. I made 6 out of 10. I was a good free throw shooter in high school. I sucked. I wasn't a player, but I could shoot free throws. And made 6 out of 10 just standing around. And he made 6 out of 10 doing this. And then by the time he got to the 3rd round, because I was rebounding and they were all going to his, he said, "I figured this out." And he did. And he ended up making 86 with his hand like that. 86 out of 100. And I started choking because I'm seeing $5 bills flying through the air every time I'm letting go here now. And so I lost $160 and went to the old Bay Bank and got 820s out of the ATM. And next night he was doing his early shooting. I gave him his money. He stuffed it in his sock. He played with my 820s in his sock that night. And I expensed this because I wrote a funny story about it. And I told my boss, the story came at some cost. I had to incur some expenses here. And evidently the word wager is frowned upon by the IRS, so it bounced back from accounting. So we switched it to 8 $20 lunches with Robert Parrish and just called it a day, and I got my money back. But that did in fact happen. So yeah, thanks for asking.
You're welcome.
So I will actually keep it with that same year, because I know you brought up the game when you scored the 6 against Atlanta and New Orleans. Like, how was that? Because I'm like, we see the highlights, but I'm like, the highlights doesn't do it justice, man. Like, just how was that game, and just like how hot was he, and just like was it really were the Atlanta Hawks really just fawning over how good he was? Because you see guys falling over the bench.
He was like invincible that year. He was at the height of his trash talking powers. He would tell guys what he was going to do on the inbounds pass, then he would do it. He started banking 3-pointers just because he could for the fun of it. And, putting his hand out for cash, running down the other end of the floor. And McHale had gotten 56 9 days earlier against the Pistons.
Wow.
Larry was feeding him because Larry hated Kent Benson, who was an Indiana guy who disrespected him in college. So he let McHale torch Kent Benson and get him ejected from the game. Kept feeding McHale the ball, and Kev got to 56, and he came out with like a minute to go. And I said, well, Dan, you should stay in there because I'm going to get that. And then 9 days later, we're in New Orleans, because the Hawks played home games in New Orleans because they couldn't sell out the Omni in Atlanta. So we stayed at the New Orleans Hyatt and took a bus, went by Rick Roby's high school on the way, and Roby went to Kentucky, which was pissed off Larry because Kentucky didn't recruit Larry Bird. They thought he was too slow, so they took Roby, who was even slower. And Larry always said it was all bribes. So we went by the high school. He said, that's where Footer got all those bribes when he was in high school, right there. He was all fired up. And we get to the gym, and it was all Celtic fans in New Orleans that night. And they put the press right behind the Hawks bench. We were a little elevated. We can see ourselves on that. And Mike Fratello was the head coach, short little guy. And Ricky Brown was a guy who had been a Celtic draftee. He was on that team. I mean, they had Dominique Wilkins. They had some great players. Doc Rivers is on that team. Mm-hmm. And it kind of grew. And then by the fourth quarter in the Hawks bench, they were a bunch of knuckleheads, and they were like leaning into each other and celebrating and falling down. And Larry started like going over to that side and just shooting right in front of them and just pointing to them. And all that video, I mean, they're not making it up. It's true. The Hawks were actually fined for that. I mean, the Hawks players
as they should have. There's no way you should be celebrating. I don't care.
It was bad.
Yeah, that's awful.
And Fratello kept switching guys. He kept changing men and trying everything. And Fratello, he got into a little fight with Ricky Brown. We saw the whole thing. And when it was over, the GM of the Hawks came into the Celtic locker room with the game ball and had Larry sign it. It was like a souvenir for the Hawks. So, he just dropped 50 in our heads. It was like, that all happened. It was good times.
What an honor, right?
Good times.
Is he the only player that you've ever seen reach that level where he starts just playing around in the middle of games?
The talking was off the charts. We could hear it because in those days we sat. I've got pictures I'm using in this book where we're sitting right, where those people pay $1,000 now. Like we were there with our table right there. And the worst was the Julius Erving. Julius was 36 years old, and Larry was in the middle of this 3-year MVP at the height of his powers. And Julius would have toyed with Larry Bird in his heyday, but he was cooked, and Larry was dominant. He was bigger and stronger. And Larry had like 38 in the second half, or 38 by the third quarter. Julius was like 1 for 9. And Larry was just, get somebody out here, old man. You can't guard me. And finally, Julius went for his throat. There's a famous picture where they're grabbing each other by the throat. And it was a Donnybrook. And it did not end well.
I love it. That could never happen now. Guys would be kicked out the league.
Oh my God! Well,
basically like Kermit Washington, right back in the day when he did to Rudy Tom. I mean, that was a little different over Rudy Tom-Johnson.
Take a look at the McHale takedown of Rambis in Game 4 of the '84 Finals when McHale comes across the floor and clotheslines Rambis. Rambis's foot almost hits the rim. He's still upended, and it was 2 shots. There was not even a flagrant rule then. They had to change the rules all around on that. So.
Common foul.
That did happen. And,
common foul, right, exactly.
So, you've been part of so many legendary moments in Boston, but I don't think there's ever been one more important than the 2004 World Series, right? So, before the Sox win that, I want to ask you a question. It's one of Ray's questions. Is before that World Series and the curse is reversed, which Red Sox playoff moment gave you the biggest heartbreak as someone who is either a fan of the sport or covering the team?
I'm not old enough to have been there in the 40s when all that stuff happened. But so I was at the Bucky Dent game in '78. That was crazy. And that was horrible for Boston because they had a 14-game lead and they blew it and ended up in a tie in a 1-game playoff and 2-0 lead in the sixth inning. It was awful. And then the Buckner game is the worst one because, again, it wasn't Game 7. People think it was, but, they're they're one strike away from winning the World Series, and it hadn't won in 68 years. It's against the Mets, and it's Saturday night in Shea Stadium, and the game's over. They got a 5-3 lead. There's 2 outs, nobody on base in the bottom of the 10th. All they got to do is get one more out, and then 3 straight singles, wild pitch, and then the error. That was the worst, Buckner's legs, because the World Series was over. They had won, and they somehow astronomically lost. And of course, the Aaron Boone game, because that's what Grady left Pedro in too long, and there was a lot of tension at that time. The teams were so popular. A-Rod, there had been a big fight to who's going to get A-Rod, and all this stuff went down. And it was never a greater rivalry than by 03-04 when it was going on then. So having witnessed those 3 was a lot to bring into the 04 season when, of course, they're down 3-0 to the Yankees. It's still the greatest Boston sports story. I mean, the first Patriots Super Bowl is pretty darn good. But the Sox going, 86 years and being down 3-0 to the Yankees in the ALCS with A-Rod having been on both teams technically, and just all the fights they had and beanball stuff they had and the great players, Manny and David and Jeter. It was just that was the height of it. Yeah.
So that brings me to an article that you wrote right before Game 4 of that ALCS.
That was the Millar thing?
The Millar thing, yeah.
Yeah.
I got to ask you, man, what did he say to you? Because I know there's the clip where he's saying,
he said that
Dan, you called us frauds. You did this. We're not frauds. We're going to win tonight. Was there more to it, or is that what happened?
Well, I mean, the article, I got a shelf of stuff here. It was a hypothetical. So they lost Game 3. They lost 19-8 in Game 3. They're down 3-0. That was a great team. That team was a wagon. And they were down 3-0 to the Yankees in the ALCS, losing 19-8. And people were throwing shit at them and booing them. It was bad. And so the next day is Game 4, and they're going down like just dying. It's horrible. So in the paper, I said, if they get swept, they will go down as the biggest pack of frauds in Boston sports history. That statement was true then. It's true today. It's a hypothetical. If I were 7 feet tall, I would have been in the NBA. It said if they lose again, they go down as frauds. Well, they didn't. They won 8 straight games from the moment I wrote that, and they swept their way to the World Series. So anyway, it was true then, it's true now. And Millar was saying that stuff, that whole thing about don't let us win tonight. He was saying that to everybody, and his whole thing about Schill and Pedro and anything can happen in Game 7. He was just saying that to everybody. And I think that was ESPN 30 for 30, but they had the crew following everybody around, and we went hard at Theo that night. Theo was hungover, and it was just a bad time for them. And nobody thought what was going to happen did happen. But so Millar was just talking up everybody and did a good job with it. And so that clip lives on in infamy, and I'm actually quite proud of it.
You should be. Because it's awesome. It gives me goosebumps every time I see it, Dan. So I love it.
Yeah, no, that's awesome for sure. But just to still kind of keep the theme with the past. So another question that I thought about, and because I love to talk about different scenarios and what if. So, if you could put together a starting 9, for an all Red Sox team, like who would you have on it?
Oh, that's good, Rayshawn. I think I did that a few years ago, and I'm trying to remember now. So, Carlton Fisk is the catcher in Hall of Fame.
Mm-hmm. Not Doug Mirabelli? No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah, and we got Wade Boggs is at third, Hall of Famer. And we got the outfield. We got Jim Rice, Carl Yastrzemski, and Ted Williams, all Hall of Famers. Bobby Doerr's second baseman, Hall of Famer. Jimmy Fox at first base, Hall of Famer. And the shortstop's Joe Cronin. Those are all Hall of Famers. And Pedro would be your starting pitcher. So there's 9 Hall of Famers. And David Ortiz would be your DH, and he will be in the Hall of Fame. So that'd be 10 players right there.
Would Manny be an honorable mention? Because I'm like, I was like,
that's more than fair, because Manny's a better hitter than Carl Yastrzemski or Jim Rice. I mean, he just is. But he's, with the 3-time Roids thing, he's not going to get in the Hall of Fame. But as a pure hitter, yeah. And defensively, Rice wasn't that good either. Manny's certainly serviceable out there.
Right. I mean, and plus, I know Rice was also MVP. I don't think Manny ever won MVP.
Manny never did. Rice had 406 total bases in 78, which hadn't been done in 30 years. So I think for pure hitting, I would take Manny. Manny was just, Manny was Jimmy Fox as a pure right-handed hitter.
And I mean, obviously, Manny was our guy, so I mean, it makes sense that obviously, you saw Yastrzemski, you saw. Is Yaz to you the best left fielder then, or was
well,
it?
I mean, for all around defensively, but he's only like a career 285 hitter. I mean, he just had a lot of compiled numbers, like longevity, and 67 was the greatest single season of any Red Sox player. Triple Crown, MVP, defensive Gold Glove. 7th game of the World Series, just he's 7 for 8 in the last 2 games they had to win, all that stuff. But he was never, he didn't have a 5-year stretch like Manny Ramirez had. I mean, hardly anybody. Ted Williams did, but Manny,
amazing. Yeah. Right. Exactly. Yeah. 'Cause I know with Manny, like I know, like before he got to Boston, he had a season where he had like 165 runs batted in.
Manny was nuts. Go look at the Cleveland team. Manny was hitting 7th for Cleveland team. They had
Tommy, Alomar,
Albert Bell, Eddie Murray, Tomei, Roberto Alomar, Omar Vizquel is one of the greatest teams of all time that didn't win.
Yeah.
So you just mentioned 9 Hall of Famers, and then you mentioned David Ortiz, which spawned this question. Does David Ortiz get into the Baseball Hall of Fame, and how does he but not Barry Bonds?
Well, David's sailing in. Everybody loves David. So I agree with the sentiment of what I think you're asking. I think it's unfair. And I think for me, you either let them all in or you don't let anybody in.
Yep.
And so far I've been, don't let any of them in. So I won't be voting for David, but he's getting in. And I understand why. And the numbers are certainly there. But to your question, I mean, I don't think Barry's any dirtier than David was, if you want to go down that path. I mean, it's just, but this is the times they played in, and a lot of people don't care about it, and I understand that.
So if we're gonna
what about Clemens then?
Yeah, I was just gonna say if we're gonna open that door,
because I mean Clemens, I mean his Red Sox career alone to me is Hall of Fame worthy. Yes, I know
he won 192 games, 3 Cy Youngs to the Red Sox. But I don't vote for him because I've been on the wall. I don't vote for any of them. I love Roger, and he's great, and he did a lot of good things here, and. I mean, he's one of the top 10 pitchers of all time by any measure. I mean, guy won 354 games and 7 Cy Young awards. Give me a break. I wish he hadn't used at the end to extend it when unnecessarily.
So I have a question about that though. So that whole era, right, is everyone's tainted from it, no matter what, for that whole 90s, 2000s era. Anyone who's ever going to get into the Hall of Fame is always going to kind of have that cloud over them in that era. Don't you just think that a simple solution could be is let them in, but make sure it's on the plaque. Make sure it's indicated that they're in. Yeah. But this happened, and this is a question that we have about it. They're still one of the best players ever, but you know what I mean? Well,
again, a Hall of Fame that includes Trevor Hoffman and
Mariano Rivera
and Harold Baines, and does not include Barry Bonds and Roger Clemens. It's a little ridiculous, So we know that. But that's the hand that's dealt. It's unfortunate, and my fear is that Bonds and Clemens are going away forever next year. It's the last year in the ballot for them. They're not getting the momentum. I don't think the old timers will vote for them, and it's a big gap to not have those guys in the Hall of Fame because they were better than everybody in the time they played. They were.
How ironic is it that the players that really saved the game for everyone in the 90s, right? Sosa, you have
McGuire.
And Barry Bonds that are ostracized and kept out for doing the thing that propelled the sport back into the fan of America.
Right, and there's a very likelihood that Piazza, Pudge Rodriguez, Bagwell were all using because they all look dirty and they're all in, but they didn't test or they're not in the Mitchell report. They didn't have the stigma that these other guys have.
I thought Pudge was on the Mitchell report, wasn't he?
Pudge Rodriguez.
I don't remember him. I know Paul Merrill was, but Bagwell in particular. I mean, because didn't he start here? Didn't he get drafted by the Red Sox?
Bagwell was traded by the Red Sox.
So I mean, if you look at him, how small he was early on, and then by the time they became the Killer Bees, with him, Biggio, and Berkman, it was like, oh, this guy really was a wagon for the wrong reason.
You guys got good knowledge for young guys. I'm impressed here. Thank you.
Oh, appreciate it, man.
Yeah,
thank you.
Thank you.
Ray, if
someone say we're not so young anymore, but
I might steal another one of your questions because it was just so well written.
Go ahead, brother.
So, Dan, what are your expectations of the 2021 Red Sox now that Alex Cora is back?
I like Alex. I don't hold that against him. I mean, probably we should more than we do. And people, he's just really, he's a good guy and he's good to be around. He was cheating. I don't know. I just can't get all in a big lather about it.
We're used to it in Boston by now.
No, I should.
Yeah.
I wouldn't vote for him. I wouldn't vote him into the Hall of Fame. So he's out of that.
Right.
But as a manager, given the shit show they got here and the horrible decision making and the cheapness up top and what they're doing to the franchise, he's good for them. These players like him. They respond to him. Him being bilingual is huge. A guy like Devers, he'll get way more out of Devers. It just is. And I would want to play for him. He's just a good guy to play for. The starting pitching is very suspect still in my view. You can make a case, but everything's got to go just right. And people get all in a lather about, Nathan Eovaldi throws 100. He's won 9 games here in 3 years. He's always hurt.
And everyone just remembers that one run.
Season, right, exactly.
Yeah, he had one great postseason performance in a game which they lost, by the way. And he makes $17 million or over 4 million for 4 years. So good for Nathan Eovaldi, good guy. Maybe he'll finally get healthy and win 18 for you because he's got that ability. We know. Eddie Rodriguez coming off the COVID, the cardiac thing, hopefully.
And he's your opening day starter too.
Garrett Richards, he's never been a winner. He's been hurt all the time. Pavetta has won 8 games in 5 years. And Perez is a meatball artist. He pitches to contact, as they say.
Which is cold for him. Sucks.
So he's Derek Lowe 2.0.
Yeah. He finds a lot of bats.
No, Derek Lowe was much better than Martin Perez.
Derek Lowe was much better. Rayshon's right again.
No, I know. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, what about? Because
Derek Lowe. My bad.
Yeah. I would still want to keep with the current team, right? So obviously, this guy was one of the main pieces coming back in the Mookie Betts trade last year. How do you feel about Alex Verdugo? I'm a fan. He was much better last year than I thought he was going to be. So do you think he's someone that can be a mainstay here going forward?
I like what I saw last year. I was pleasantly surprised. I was bothered that the Dodgers gave up on him the way they did. I thought, they didn't have to give up anything in that deal. That was the Red Sox were driven to get rid of payroll. So it's not like the Dodgers were in a position of strength and they gave him up very readily. That bothered me. He's a little dirty in that sex scandal thing they had there. There's something not right about that that's never been fully explained. So I hope he's got everything on the straight and narrow and it's all good. He is a character. We haven't been able to be what little I saw when we were around him. I think players respond to him. He's a very cocky kid, and his ability. I love his swing. And I don't think he's as good as he thinks he is or his fans think he is, but there's something there. I'm reluctant to anoint him just yet because so many things. Carl Everett was the best player you ever saw for 4 months at the beginning of the 98 season, whatever.
He was amazing.
Guys before.
Yeah, and as soon as he headbutted the umpire, it was over. It was over.
This kid's got something, and hopefully it gets steered in the right direction.
So, Dan, you just said that we really know our stuff. I appreciate that. I hope that you still feel this way after I ask this question because it just came to my mind. The Red Sox-Yankees rivalry was so great up until 2004, right? So, would you rather have those days of that rivalry being at that peak or still win that World Series and have it go away? Because it's not there anymore. I don't think that the common generation really cares about Red Sox-Yankees as much as they used to.
It's a really good question. And I think that, we always said when they won, it'll never be the same. And it hasn't been. And it sucks now because they're bordering on irrelevance. But I do think that there's almost nothing they could have done to have avoided where we are now. Just the way the game has trended, the slowness of it, young people with their devices and the speed with which they want it, how it's not a friend of fantasy. It's people's attention spans. It doesn't lend itself to today's young people. And I understand that. It's asking a lot. So the older fans are dying off and not going to be replaced, and that's bad. So I don't think there's much the Sox could have done about it. So I'll take those years when we had them and say that was the height of that, and it was never going to be as good again, no matter what they did with drafting or signing or trading or whatever. I just don't think they could have sustained the level of intensity that we had on that thing. It was too much to sustain.
Yeah, I just remember like every game mattered in like 03, 04, even 02 when they missed the playoffs and they went 93 and 69, right? Like they were pretty relevant and for that 3-year stretch. And now if you would have told me that 17 years later that people in this area would value them below the Bruins, Patriots, it's wild to me. I think storylines are what keeps people invested, and they just haven't been able to keep that up. I think, with the Yankees winning and having that nice little rivalry with the Phillies in 08, 09, that was fun, but we've never come across them again. So do you think that it's like the flick of a switch that if we see the Yankees in the ALCS, we can tap into it again?
You could approximate, but you're never going to get to that level again. It would just be better than now, but you're not going to go back to that level ever.
Well, I mean, we did. I know we faced them in 2018 in the division round.
That was a great series.
The only moment, or the two moments I remember most in that series was the JD Martinez home run in game one, and then obviously Brett Holt getting the home run to complete the cycle. And I mean, basically that crowd in Yankee Stadium was dead, right? Like it's not the same where Yankee Stadium is not the same as it was in 03 and 04, obviously, because it's new fans, like you said. But yeah, man, I mean, I was even thinking about that 99 series too, like Roger, like you'll never get that essence back.
Yeah, well, the greatest thing from 18 was the Saturday when the Yanks won here, and Sanchez hit a home run to center field, one of the longest home runs ever. And Judge, I'm sure, shared that night. And that was the night Judge went by with New York, in the jukebox by the Sox clubhouse there with the boombox. And that was like the highlight of the series. And the Red Sox just went there and just kicked the crap out of them.
Oh,
by 1,000 runs. That was it.
Yeah.
That team was so good, though. Which leads me to a question I have to ask you. Mookie Betts, man. So them giving up Mookie Betts, I thought, in my opinion, I was going to watch Mookie Betts in a Red Sox uniform until I was in my 40s and 50s. Like, I thought this dude was going to be a mainstay. He was one of the best players I've ever seen in Red Sox uniform. And all of a sudden, it's the team that makes the most money in baseball is cutting payroll and can't pay this dude. Can you make that make sense to me? Like, I know you said that they were going to give him up for nothing and they actually got a good return for him. But, like, why did that have to happen? Was it did Mookie not want to be here? Like, what was the case?
Yeah, I have no forgiveness for them. So don't misinterpret what I said earlier. Like, they've tried to get the local media to push the narrative. Well, he wasn't staying anyway, so we had to do what we could do. That's a joke. That's bull. You read his thing. It's GQ right now. Like he was buying a house here. They wouldn't meet his price. They wouldn't pay. They wouldn't meet his price. That was it. It was all about money, and I understand that. It was his time to strike. He did. They weren't willing to meet it. And then, they finished in last place with the worst team since 1965. The Dodgers win the World Series. They got exactly what they deserved. And that thing will never be right. There's no excuse for it. If you're going to own the Boston Red Sox and have an investment of $700 million turn into $7 billion in 20 years, then you have to keep that asset. And you have to invest in that and overpay if that's what it takes so that the second half of the contract will be rendered meaningless and all that stuff. Say that. But don't have Tom Warner go on and say what idiots the Dodgers are for doing this, that the money won't be worth it in 15 years, whatever. It's bullshit. The Red Sox are more than a business. They're a public domain, public entity, public trust that whoever owns it has to value that. And it was incumbent on them to keep them. That's on them. Shame on them. And David Price, they're paying $16 million for David Price to pitch for the Dodgers this year and last year. I mean, he didn't even pitch, but it's like these salary dumps for the Boston Red Sox, unforgivable. And they're going to tell you that we have the third highest payroll this year, so stop it. But that's because of all the dead money, which is Price, Pedroia, Benintendi. They have dead money. That's on them. Evaldi, in effect, is dead money. It's $17 million for not a lot for 3 wins.
Yeah,
so that's on too. Chris Sale, who they gave the money to. So bad decisions don't take away the notion that they're cheaped out. Every option they've had over the last 12 months, they've gone for the lowest salaried guy, except for Richards, who we don't know if he's any good or not.
They did the same thing with Lester, though, right? Remember when he went over when he left, and they said, "Well, we wouldn't he wouldn't have stayed if we tried."
And then they overpaid for Price and Sale and Evaldi after not giving Lester the money.
Right. Like, how about you just try? I know that we're kind of wrapping up here, Dan. I wanted to ask you my final question. we've seen over the last, I think it's been rapidly over the last 20 years that print media has really just taken a back seat. And those that were prominent before are no longer, right? There's been a big fallout. Now everyone is an influencer, which pisses me off. How do you think you have managed to stay at the top of your game and so relevant through all of these changes?
Well, I mean, there would be some argument to the relevance of myself at this time by a portion of the population out there, and that's okay. Like, I'm not relevant on talk radio anymore. They want young hot takes and all that, and that's fine. I had enough of that, But and the Globe thing, my audience is older, but and I think even the haters kind of keep the thing going. It's sustaining a little bit. So, but the takes they are how I feel at the time. They're not generated to be clickbait, or it's just how I feel at the time. And some of it's provocative for people, but it's just sports. We should be able to argue about Manny Ramirez and Jim Rice and not dislike each other. I've always said that. It's okay. That's what sports is supposed to be. So I'm good with it. I appreciate the question. The print thing, like one thing, like we talked about this Duxbury High thing. It used to be you could go do a high school story on the quarterback at Marshfield. You could change his life by being in the Boston Globe. Can't do that anymore. Like that kid's already online. He's got, hoop.com or whatever, and their lives are their lives, and they don't care about us. And I understand that. So we don't have the platform or the reach that we used to have. I'm okay with it. It's evolution. You can't bay at the moon. Like Barstool is more popular than we are, and I don't like that, but there's nothing I can do about it. So I just skate in my lane here and doing the best I can. And I have energy about it. I like the sports. I love the platform, and writing a book on 40 years ago the Celtics was really fun, and people will actually read it because they want to hear that Larry Bird story. So again, I'm blessed. I got to read and talk about sports for 40 years in this market with 12 championships in this century, and some of the losses, and young folks like yourselves who know so much about sports and still want to talk about it. So I just feel really lucky and blessed about it. And I try not to complain too much about it. It's not the way it used to be, because too bad. Things evolve.
Yeah. Well, obviously, thank you so much for taking the time. Before we let you go, we want to always let you tell people where they can find you. And you already give us a little bit of a preview of an upcoming book in November. So please tell the listeners out there where they can find you and what they can expect from you over the next couple of months.
Yeah, go down to 7-Eleven and get the Boston Globe tomorrow morning. I think it's $2. Good luck with that. Hold it with the paper. Right. But no. So Boston.com, whatever the hell, BostonGlobe.com, whatever we are, and I'm on Twitter, Dan_Shaughnessy on Twitter. Wish it lasted forever. Simon & Schuster, Scribner, Publishers, November, old days with the Celtics and Larry Bird and all that stuff. But you guys are fun. It was nice chatting with you guys. I wish you luck with the program.
Well, Dan, thank you so much. And thank you all for listening to this episode of Missing the Point. So for Rayshawn Buchanan, Bob Kelly, and Dan Shaughnessy, this is Michael Marcangelo signing off.